Before we dive into the misery of medieval life, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe you're listening in bed, wrapped in blankets, settling in for the night. Maybe you're tuning in from a late night study session, or during a long drive through the depths of sleep deprivation. Whatever the case, I want to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments, because this journey is about to begin. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps keep these stories coming, ensuring that history's most ridiculous moments are told exactly the way they deserve to be. Now, let's step into a life you would never survive. You are a gong farmer in medieval England. You didn't choose this life. No one chooses this life. Somewhere along the way, either bad luck, terrible decisions, or sheer desperation landed you in a profession that most people pretend doesn't exist. You wake up every day knowing that your work is the worst kind of necessary. A medieval town without sanitation is a breeding ground for disease, chaos, and smells so horrifying that even the rats reconsider their life choices. Someone has to clean it up. That someone is you. Your job is simple, in theory. Every town has cesspits, deep, disgusting holes filled with human waste, left to rot and thicken into something far beyond normal filth. The pits are never emptied until it's absolutely necessary, meaning when it's finally your time to go down, the stench has reached new, uncharted levels of horror. The first step of the job is climbing into the pit, something no sane person would ever do willingly. But you don't have a choice. The cesspit is hot, which is concerning. It shouldn't be. But medieval people don't understand gas buildup. So when you lower yourself into the depths, the air hits you like a curse. You breathe in rotten fumes, the kind that no lungs should ever be exposed to, and immediately regret every life decision leading up to this moment. You gag. Everyone gags at first. Your tools are a shovel, a bucket, and zero dignity. You start digging, breaking through layers of compacted filth, and try not to think about the things buried deep within. You tell yourself it's just waste, but you know it isn't. Medieval cesspits contain anything people needed to dispose of, which means you will find bones, you will find rats, some alive, some deeply unfortunate, and you will find objects that make no sense at all, like a perfectly preserved shoe that somehow outlasted everything else in the pit. Once you have a bucket full of horror, you haul it out, only to be met with absolute disgust from the townsfolk watching you work. No one speaks to you, unless they absolutely have to. People cross the street when you walk by. They avoid eye contact, as if acknowledging you might make them smell as bad as you do. You are invisible until necessary, summoned only when the filth threatens to consume everything. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is when the gases betray you. There is a reason gong farmers die young. Cesspits don't just smell. They produce toxins so potent that just standing in them too long can kill you. You know this. You know you should take breaks, get fresh air. But breaks mean you have to climb out, and climbing out means you have to climb back in. And that is somehow worse than staying inside. And then, the collapse happens. It always happens. Cesspits aren't designed for safety, because no one cares about your safety. All it takes is one bad step, one soft section of filth, and suddenly you are waist deep in disaster. The bucket is gone. You don't know where it landed, but that doesn't matter. What matters is getting out before the fumes knock you unconscious, before the filth claims you entirely, before your job becomes your tomb. You struggle, grabbing for anything solid, but nothing is solid enough. You curse. You curse everything, including the baker who dumped half his failed dough into this pit last week. creating a new horrible texture that now clings to your boots. And then you feel hands grab you. Townsfolk pull you out, not because they care, but because they need the cesspit emptied. And a dead gong farmer doesn't finish the job. You lay on the ground, covered in things you refuse to identify, catching your breath while the magistrate looks mildly disappointed that you survived. This is your life, and you will wake up tomorrow and do it all again. Because if you don't, this town will drown in its own filth. The morning arrives like a cruel joke. You wake up with the familiar stench clinging to your skin, despite last night's desperate attempt to scrub it off with medieval soap, which, for the record, is barely an improvement over just rubbing dirt on yourself. Your muscles ache. Your lungs still feel thick with the remnants of cesspit fumes, and your nose has permanently adapted to the horror. Congratulations. You have been reshaped by filth itself. Outside, the town is already moving, its people blissfully unaware of the suffering required to keep their streets from turning into a disease-ridden swamp. Bakers stack fresh loaves, merchants shout their wares, and the butcher, a man who routinely stands ankle deep in blood, still somehow looks at you with pity, as if your profession is worse than his. And it is, because today you must return to the pits. Word spreads fast when the cesspits are at capacity, and today they are overflowing. A disaster of biblical proportions threatens the town's already questionable hygiene standards. The assistant arrives at your doorstep, looking mildly disgusted as he hands you a formal summons from the magistrate. Urgent, he says, as if you needed clarification that human waste flooding the streets is indeed urgent. You sigh. You sigh so deeply. The assistant steps back instinctively, as though he expects the breath itself to smell like the horrors beneath the city. And honestly, he wouldn't be wrong. So, you gather your worthless tools, a rusty shovel, a cracked bucket, and zero dignity, and march toward the pits of despair, ready to face another battle against filth. The disaster beneath the city, the cesspit is worse than usual, not just full, but actively hostile. Medieval people don't understand waste management, so instead of clearing it out periodically, they have been using it as a general dumping ground for months. This means the contents have reached new levels of instability, forming what can only be described as a sentient, festering nightmare. One look inside, and you know, today is going to be hell. A town official stands nearby, arms crossed, looking deeply inconvenienced by the situation. It needs to be cleared immediately. He announces, as if you weren't already aware, that sewage is pouring into the streets. You inhale sharply, preparing yourself mentally, before lowering yourself into the abyss. Immediately, the fumes attack. Your eyes burn. Your throat tightens, and you swear you feel something moving beneath the surface. You tell yourself it's just a rat, but your brain whispers something far worse. The texture is wrong. It's too thick, too unpredictable. Every step threatens to sink you deeper into the unknown depths of ancient rot. And the shovel barely cuts through the layers of compressed filth that have fused into something indescribable. And then, the worst happens, a collapse. Beneath you, the pit shifts, as though it has decided to consume you entirely. Your feet sink, your balance disappears, and suddenly, you are half submerged in centuries' worth of disaster. You scream. You scream loudly, the kind of sound reserved for absolute terror, and above you, the townsfolk react immediately. "He's going under," someone shouts. "Pull him out." But there's hesitation, because touching you means getting involved, and no one wants to be involved with whatever horror is consuming you alive. The magistrate makes direct eye contact with you as you flail desperately, and you see genuine contemplation in his expression, as though he is trying to decide whether to save you or simply declare the cesspit your final resting place. The butcher steps forward, reluctant but sympathetic, reaching out with a thick rope. "Grab it, fool!" You grab. You climb, pulling yourself free, emerging like a creature cursed by the gods themselves, drenched in the worst substance known to man. And the crowd recoils. For a moment, all is silent except for the drip, drip, drip of what should not be dripping. Then, the magistrate exhales sharply, composing himself, before declaring with great authority, "Well, the pit still needs clearing." You stare at him. You stare at him so hard. You hope your very expression curses his bloodline for generations to come. But you know the truth. This isn't over. Not today. Not tomorrow. Because as long as filth exists, you will always be the one forced to clean it. The cesspit is finally cleared. Or, at least, it's as cleared as it will ever be. You stand at the edge, covered in horrors, drenched in substances that should not be named, while the magistrate nods approvingly, as if he personally contributed to the effort. "You may go," he says, with the graciousness of a man dismissing someone from court, rather than sending them home to recover from near suffocation in human filth. You leave without a word, too exhausted to complain, too dazed from prolonged exposure to medieval sanitation to think about much else. The streets are busy, as always, and as you pass, the townsfolk still refuse to acknowledge your existence. You could be actively dying, coughing up fumes that should not be inhaled, and they would still walk past, noses wrinkled, eyes averted, pretending none of this is happening. But you are done. You have survived another day, and against all odds, you are still breathing. But fate, as always, has other plans. You don't even make it back home before you hear your next horrible opportunity. Someone shouting. A frantic call for help. A messenger arrives, the kind who exists solely to bring bad news. He stops in front of you, barely catching his breath, looking mildly disgusted, and says, "The rats. They've multiplied." And just like that, you have a new job. The town has decided that today, you are a rat catcher. You are now a rat catcher. Congratulations. Your career has somehow managed to get worse, which is impressive, considering you were literally drowning in human waste just hours ago. But medieval towns have problems beyond sanitation, and right now, the rats have decided to take control. The messenger looks at you like you are personally responsible for this infestation, as if the rats are following you specifically. He waves a hand dramatically toward the nearest alley, where a swarm of rodents is currently having what appears to be a full-blown territorial dispute over something unidentifiable and probably cursed. "They've multiplied beyond reason," he says, voice dripping with urgency. You stare at him. He stares back, waiting. You already know what's coming next. The magistrate arrives, just in time to confirm your new nightmare. The town requires immediate action, he declares, as if this is some noble quest, rather than a desperate attempt to stop the streets from becoming a rodent-infested wasteland. You sigh. You sigh so deeply, the rats pause mid-conflict to glance in your direction. Then, your tools are provided. A wooden stick for hitting rats, a bag for collecting rats, and a small handful of poisoned bait, which, based on the town's horrific record of medical knowledge, is likely just old bread soaked in something unholy. The magistrate claps his hands. Bijin, you have no choice. You march toward the infestation, preparing for battle, as medieval society once again proves that your suffering is its only solution. The rats are everywhere. They scurry between barrels, climb over discarded food, and appear far too confident for creatures that should have an instinctive fear of humans. But that's the thing. These are medieval rats. They do not fear death, because death has never caught up to them. As you step forward, stick in hand, preparing for the most humiliating battle of your life, the townsfolk watch from a distance, unwilling to help. Of course. Because why risk themselves when you exist to do their suffering for them? The first rat makes eye contact with you. This is not normal behavior, and it deeply concerns you. Then, it does something unforgivable. It stands on its hind legs like a miniature bandit and chirps in defiance, as if declaring war right then and there. You swing. The rat dodges perfectly, disappearing into the shadows, and the rest of the infestation reacts immediately. Dozens of tiny, plague-ridden monsters begin scrambling in all directions. Some toward you, some toward each other, and some directly into a nearby bakery, which is deeply unfortunate for everyone involved. They're fighting back. A villager shouts, horrified. The magistrate nods grimly, as if watching an actual war unfold, and for one horrifying moment, you realize that you alone are expected to defeat them all. No army. No reinforcements. Just you, one stick, a burlap sack, and the worst job assignment in history. Welcome to medieval pest control. Your battle against the rats escalates rapidly. You swing wildly at any rodent that dares to exist in your presence, but they are faster, smarter, and deeply disrespectful. The plague-ridden horrors weave through barrels, scramble over discarded bread, and scurry straight toward homes, disappearing into tiny gaps in wooden walls like professional escape artists. You clutch your burlap sack with the desperation of a man who has accepted his fate, managing to capture a handful of unfortunate creatures. But there is no victory in this, only endless, humiliating struggle. The magistrate watches critically, unimpressed. They are still everywhere, he points out, as though you hadn't noticed. You are aware. The baker screams in despair as several rats storm his shop, knocking over sacks of flour and disappearing into the supplies that were intended for tomorrow's bread. Oh, that's ruined. Then, he mutters, staring at the infestation with dead eyes, fully accepting that this is his life now. You consider quitting, but where would you go? There are no jobs in medieval society that offer dignity or comfort, only new variations of misery. So, you press forward, chasing the worst offenders, using the poisoned bait strategically, luring the more gullible rodents into their unfortunate fate. Hours pass. The streets slowly empty, the rats finally dispersing, either captured, killed, or smart enough to flee. The magistrate nods, satisfied. You have done well, he says, which is the closest thing to a compliment you will ever receive. Then he glances at the blacksmith, who steps forward with a new piece of paper. Your stomach drops instantly. You already know what's coming next. The town requires a grave digger, the blacksmith announces. And just like that, you have a new job. You are now a grave digger. Of all the miserable jobs you've had, this one might be the worst. Not because it's physically unbearable, though it absolutely is, but because medieval society is deeply superstitious. And anything even remotely related to death comes with absurd consequences. You don't just dig graves. You navigate a world of paranoia, where every corpse is a potential curse, every burial site a breeding ground for superstition, and every conversation with a town official ends with some new ridiculous rule that makes no sense, but must be obeyed. Your first assignment is simple, or at least it should be. A merchant has died. Not particularly important, not particularly well liked, but dead nonetheless. Your job is to prepare his grave, transport his body, and ensure no supernatural disasters occur in the process, because, according to the local priest, failure to follow the proper burial procedure could result in vengeful spirits, which is not ideal for anyone involved. So, you begin. The first mistake is letting people watch. You dig the grave, slow and methodical, shoveling heavy dirt, sweating under the merciless sun, while townsfolk gather at a distance, whispering about omens. If the first shovel of dirt is too dry, an elderly woman mutters, "It means the dead will rise at dawn." You stare at her. She stares back, dead serious. The magistrate nods in agreement, because, naturally, this town must adhere to rules made up by someone's great-great-grandfather who probably just liked starting rumors. You sigh. You sigh so deeply, the priest makes the sign of the cross, just in case you accidentally summoned something. Ignoring the nonsense, you continue digging, finally reaching the correct depth, before moving on to the second, much worse phase of the job, collecting the body. This is where things go horribly wrong. The merchant's body is waiting in the church, placed in a crude wooden coffin, because medieval carpenters do not care for elegance. But the problem isn't the coffin. The problem is the rats, because somehow they have returned. The priest wails in despair as several unholy vermin scramble out of the coffin itself, scattering across the church floor like tiny agents of chaos, disrupting the solemn atmosphere of mourning and fear. "The body is cursed!" someone shouts immediately, because medieval people never wait for reasonable explanations. Only the worst possible supernatural theory. The magistrate glances at you, unimpressed. "Fix it," he says, as though removing rats from a coffin is a standard part of your job. You stare at him, then stare at the coffin, then stare at the rats, who appear deeply invested in staying exactly where they are. You do not have time for this. So, with the resigned patience of a man who has suffered too much, you grab the nearest broom, swat the horrible creatures into reluctant retreat, and finally prepare to transport the body. The townsfolk remain unconvinced. If rats touched him, a fisherman mutters, "He will not rest. Rats carry bad spirits. The grave must be twice as deep." The magistrate nods, approving the absurd demand, because why waste a reasonable amount of effort when you could instead destroy the digger's will to live? So now, you must return to the burial site, dig even deeper, and pretend this entire process is normal, which it absolutely is not. Hours later, after battling rats, superstition, and exhaustion, the merchant is finally lowered into the grave. Prayers are spoken. Dirt is placed, and the priest blesses the ground, just in case lingering spirits decide to cause problems. The magistrate wipes his hands, as though he personally contributed, then glances at the town records. Preparing for the next inevitable disaster, he sighs. "The miller's apprentice," he says, flipping a parchment, has drowned. You already know what's coming next. You must prepare the body for burial, the magistrate says, and ensure the river spirits do not claim his soul. You inhale, you exhale, and just like that, you have a new job. You are now responsible for preparing the drowned body for burial. This job is less physically demanding than digging graves, but somehow twice as cursed, because medieval people do not trust water. To them, drowning is not just an accident. It is a sign, a bad omen, a message from the river spirits, who have supposedly claimed the soul of the unfortunate victim. And if the proper rituals aren't performed, the apprentice's spirit might remain trapped in the water, doomed to drag others into the depths as punishment. This is what you must prevent. The body is retrieved from the river by a group of deeply uncomfortable villagers, all of whom insist on making the situation worse with their superstitious commentary. If the fish have nibbled the body, an old man declares, he is claimed forever. The river demands another soul. A woman whispers dramatically, clutching her scarf like an oracle seeing the future. You ignore them entirely, because there is no logical way to deal with these nonsense beliefs. Instead, you focus on the practical issues, like the fact that the apprentice is bloated, cold, and still dripping, which means you must figure out a way to make him appear presentable before burial. And medieval funeral preparation is not advanced. There are no embalmers here, no formaldehyde to slow decay. Just you, a bucket of herbs, and the increasing paranoia of the townsfolk, who are waiting to see whether this body will bring misfortune. The priest arrives, muttering prayers, throwing small handfuls of blessed salt at the corpse, while the magistrate supervises with his usual expression of complete disinterest. All must be done properly. The priest insists. You already know what's coming next. The water ritual. You have to cleanse the body. Which is deeply ironic, considering the body was just in the river, and should technically already be clean. But medieval logic does not care for irony. So, you scrub the apprentice using a mixture of herbs, oils, and aggressively questionable soap, while the priest chants about purification, ensuring that any lingering spirits are banished before the burial. The process is long, miserable, and entirely unnecessary, but finally, the body is deemed safe for its grave. The magistrate nods, satisfied. The spirit has not resisted, he declares, as if this is a fact rather than just pure guesswork. The burial proceeds. Dirt is placed. The river spirits are supposedly pacified. And just as you begin to leave, the magistrate glances at yet another town record. The castle guards are complaining of rats again. He says flatly, your entire body tenses. You already know what's coming next. You must report to the castle, he says. And just like that, you have a new job. You are now responsible for castle pest control. This should be just another rat-catching job. No different from the horrors you've already endured. But castles are a different beast entirely. For one, the nobles expect results without effort. They demand the rats be gone, yet refuse to acknowledge how bad the infestation truly is. Because to them, the presence of rats is an insult, a reminder that even wealth cannot keep filth away. And therefore, it is your responsibility to erase the problem completely, without disturbing their comfort. You approach the castle gates, where the guards look mildly disgusted by your presence. Finally, one mutters, this mess is getting out of control. You already know what's coming next. You are led inside, marched through grand stone hallways, past tapestries that attempt to make medieval life look dignified, and toward the disaster in question. The royal kitchens. The infestation is worse than expected. Rats are everywhere. On the tables, the floor, the shelves, rummaging through fine food, meant for the nobility, chewing through stored grains, and openly mocking the castle's sense of superiority. The cook clutches his head in despair, muttering about how he will be executed if this continues, because, in medieval society, if something goes wrong, someone has to be blamed, and the blame will never fall on nobility. This must be handled immediately. The castle steward announces, waving his hands like a man who has never personally solved a problem in his life. The guards nod, as if this statement alone has somehow contributed to the solution. You inhale slowly, preparing yourself for another battle against disease-ridden horrors. And then the worst instruction arrives. The rats must be removed quietly. The steward declares, voice grave. Quietly, meaning no disturbance. No sign that the castle ever had an infestation. No fuss whatsoever. You stare at him. He stares back, fully serious. You already know this is impossible. And yet, you begin anyway. Because what choice do you have? After hours of relentless battle against castle rats, who refuse to acknowledge human superiority, you finally manage to reduce the infestation. Not completely, of course, because rats always return, but enough that the kitchen staff stops, screaming every 5 minutes, and the king can eat his dinner without interruption. The captain of the guard nods approvingly, as if this was a noble quest, rather than a humiliating war against rodents who have lived far better lives than you. The king is satisfied. He declares, as though his words should be celebrated. You do not care. You are covered in filth, bruised from chasing creatures who do not respect you, and deeply aware that this will not be the last time you are called back to deal with the castle's problems. You are ready to leave, ready to disappear into obscurity, ready to finally collapse into a sleep free of rodent-related nightmares. But fate, as always, has other plans. Before you can escape, another messenger arrives, looking both frantic and deeply unimpressed with your existence. The bridge collapsed. He announces. You stare at him. He sighs. The magistrate says you're to help rebuild it. And just like that, you have a new job. You are now a medieval bridge builder, and unlike rat catching, grave digging, or sanitation work, this task is physically exhausting, technically impossible, and doomed from the very start. Because medieval engineering is a disaster waiting to happen. You are now a medieval bridge builder, and your life has officially reached new levels of disaster. Building a bridge in medieval England is not a structured, well-planned task. It is chaos, guesswork, and prayer. Because nobody knows anything about proper engineering, but they still expect you to complete this job without failure. And the worst part? You are not an architect. You are not trained. You were never supposed to do this. But the magistrate, in his infinite wisdom, has decided you will be involved. Because apparently, if you can dig graves and clear filth, you can also construct structurally sound crossings over rivers. The bridge has collapsed completely, leaving nothing but broken wood, splintered stone, and deeply concerned villagers, all of whom now expect you to figure this out. And medieval construction is doomed from the start. The materials are already wrong. You stand among the workers, who are equally clueless, staring at a pile of supplies that do not inspire confidence. The wood is rotting. The stone blocks are too few. The ropes are frayed, and the nails are rusty enough to actively threaten everyone's health. A carpenter, squinting at the wreckage, nods to himself as though he understands something about bridges, then confidently states, "We just need more wood." You blink at him. The town does not have more wood. The magistrate already confiscated what little remained for an unrelated church repair, meaning this bridge must somehow be built using scraps. The workers grumble. This project is going to fail immediately. But no one is allowed to say that out loud, because in medieval England, failure does not result in re-evaluation. It results in blame, and you do not want to be blamed. So, with the absolute confidence of people who have no expertise whatsoever, the construction begins. The blueprint is just guesswork. There is no real blueprint for this bridge. There is no formal plan, because medieval bridge builders do not make plans. Instead, one of the elders sketches an approximation in the dirt with a stick, nods to himself, and declares, "This will do." Everyone accepts this immediately, because why question it? You watch, deeply concerned, as workers move haphazardly, stacking wood without alignment, hammering pieces without measurement, securing beams with knots that would make sailors cry, and trusting that if it looks like a bridge, it must function as one. You try to speak, you try to offer basic logic, such as, shouldn't the support beams be tested before placement? But the foreman waves off your concerns entirely, saying, "We built a bridge last year. It was fine. That bridge collapsed immediately." But no one mentions that. Instead, the construction continues with misplaced confidence and absolute ignorance, as medieval engineering once again proves itself to be a disaster waiting to happen. The bridge is somehow completed, against all odds. After days of struggling, the bridge is finished. It is unstable, visibly concerning, and held together with what can only be described as sheer optimism. But the magistrate is pleased, and that is the only thing that matters. The first test. A group of merchants ordered to cross it immediately, because what better way to confirm structural integrity than using live subjects? You watch with mild horror as they step onto the wooden planks, each one creaking dangerously, each stone support shifting slightly, as the entire structure threatens to betray them at any moment. But somehow it holds, for now. The magistrate claps approvingly, declaring, "A success!" You do not agree. You already know that within a year or less, this bridge will collapse again, leading to another crisis, another misguided attempt at reconstruction, and another miserable job for you. But for now, you are done. You have survived medieval construction, and you are ready to disappear forever. But fate, as always, has other plans. Another messenger arrives, looking deeply unimpressed with your existence, and announces, "The town requires a night watchman." You inhale, you exhale, and just like that, you have a new job. You are now a medieval night watchman, and this job is going to be far worse than it sounds. You are now a medieval night watchman, and this job is far worse than it sounds. Standing guard through the darkest hours, your only task is to watch the streets, listen for suspicious activity, and ideally prevent crime before it happens. But medieval England has no proper law enforcement. Only poorly armed watchmen, expected to maintain order with nothing but torches, clubs, and a vague sense of authority. And tonight is already going wrong. Your equipment is insulting. The magistrate hands you your supplies, a lantern, dim, inconsistent, and barely effective. A wooden staff, which is supposed to act as your main weapon, but is nothing more than an underwhelming stick. A whistle, for calling for backup, which is hilarious considering no one is going to help you. The magistrate nods solemnly, as if presenting actual military grade equipment, and says, "You must ensure the safety of the town." You already know this is impossible, because medieval crime does not follow rules. The criminals are smarter than you. The first problem arises within an hour. A thief, moving quickly through the marketplace, hands something off to an accomplice, disappearing before you can even shout a warning. You pursue the accomplice, waving your wooden staff aggressively. But the man knows these streets better than you do. He turns down a dark alley, vanishing completely, leaving you standing in the open, looking deeply foolish, while nearby villagers pretend not to notice your failure. You inhale sharply, and right then, as if the universe has decided to test your patience further, a second thief strikes. This time, it's worse, because medieval criminals do not steal quietly. They yell and throw distractions, creating absolute chaos, ensuring that by the time you understand what's happening, they are already gone, having stolen whatever they came for. While townsfolk laugh, behind their hands at your absolute inability to stop anything. You have lost control of the night, and the magistrate will not care for excuses. But the real disaster hasn't even begun yet, because in the distance, you hear a scream, and when you follow the noise, you find something far worse than mere thieves. You find a full-blown medieval superstition in progress. A gathering of townsfolk, standing around a terrified woman, shouting accusations. The first words you hear, "She is a witch!" You inhale so sharply, your soul nearly leaves your body, because medieval witch trials are a nightmare, and unfortunately, now you are involved. The accusations escalate quickly. The townsfolk, fueled by fear and complete nonsense, surround the terrified woman, pointing fingers, shouting superstitions, throwing wild theories into the night air with no evidence whatsoever. "She cursed my cow," an old man declares, furious. "My bread didn't rise this morning," a baker screams, panicked. "She looked at me strangely 3 days ago. I felt a chill," someone else adds, because why not? The magistrate arrives, eyes already filled with impatience, and sighs deeply, as though he does not have time for this, despite the fact that this is now your problem too. "She must be questioned," he says, which you already know means this will end badly, because medieval witch trials do not care for logic. They care for spectacle, for paranoia, for proving guilt through impossible means, and for making your life significantly worse than it already is. The investigation begins. The woman is dragged forward, forced to defend herself against accusations so absurd, even a child would question them. The magistrate nods solemnly, preparing to evaluate whether she is a practitioner of dark magic using methods that make absolutely no sense at all. And you have two options. You can step forward, attempt to introduce logic, and immediately be labeled a suspected accomplice. Or you can stand silently, watching history spiral into absolute madness, ensuring that the worst medieval traditions remain intact. Unfortunately, no matter what happens, this trial will proceed, and medieval justice is ridiculous. The magistrate clears his throat, preparing to evaluate the accused. Despite knowing absolutely nothing about witchcraft, the woman pleads her innocence, voice shaking, explaining over and over that she is just a simple baker, that she has never performed dark magic, that she does not even know how to read, let alone cast spells. But none of it matters, because once an accusation is made, medieval trials do not operate on reason. They operate on spectacle, superstition, and deeply questionable testing methods. And the first ridiculous test, the water trial. Because apparently, if she floats, she is guilty. And if she drowns, she was innocent. Medieval logic never fails to disappoint. The trial begins. The townsfolk drag the accused toward the river, chanting prayers, muttering about dark forces, whispering wild theories about how witches steal people's breath at night. A completely made-up belief, but one that everyone accepts immediately. The magistrate nods solemnly, preparing to observe the results, as if this is a scientific experiment rather than complete nonsense. The woman struggles, begs, cries out, but nobody listens, because once the trial starts, logic is no longer allowed in the conversation. You stand to the side, deeply aware that there is nothing you can do, that history is repeating its worst mistakes, that this situation is only going to get worse before it gets better. And then, she is thrown into the water. The results make no sense. The accused hits the river, thrashes frantically, trying to stay above the surface. The townsfolk watch closely, evaluating every movement, nodding to themselves, deciding whether the spirits will reveal her guilt or innocence. She floats, desperately trying to swim, but because she has basic survival instincts. Her ability to remain above water is immediately seen as proof of dark magic. She does not sink. A villager shouts, horrified. She resists the river's judgment.
She is a witch!
The magistrate nods, deeply satisfied with this ridiculous conclusion, and the townsfolk move forward, preparing to drag her back onto land, where the next phase of her trial will begin. And this is only the beginning of medieval nonsense. Because now comes the interrogation, where the accused must prove her innocence by answering questions designed to guarantee her failure. The interrogation begins with the magistrate clearing his throat, preparing to ask the most ridiculous questions imaginable, designed to ensure failure no matter what the accused says. The woman, soaked, shivering, and absolutely terrified, is forced forward, surrounded by a crowd that has already decided her fate, even though nothing about this trial makes sense. You stand to the side, watching in disbelief, as history once again proves that logic is not welcome in medieval England. The magistrate nods solemnly, then asks, "When did you first speak to the devil?" The woman stares at him, horrified. I have never spoken to the devil," she cries, desperate. The crowd murmurs, unimpressed. A denial is suspicious, someone mutters. "Only a witch would refuse to confess." The magistrate nods, as though this is an acceptable conclusion, then asks his next impossible question. "What spells have you cast upon the livestock?" The woman shakes her head violently, eyes wide with panic. "None. I do not know magic." The butcher steps forward, raising a dramatic hand. "My pig sneezed 3 nights ago," he shouts accusingly. "Was it sick?" The magistrate asks. "No. It has never sneezed before." "Then it was bewitched." The magistrate says this as though it is undeniable fact, and the crowd instantly agrees. Because in medieval society, logic is optional, but fear is mandatory. The woman begs, pleads, insists she is innocent, but none of it matters. Because once accused, medieval justice only moves in one direction. And the final test, the witch pricking, where the accused is stabbed with a small needle, because if she does not bleed, she is guilty. You inhale slowly, preparing to witness one of history's worst legal practices in action. Because this is not justice. This is a disaster. The magistrate steps forward, holding the needle, preparing to perform the infamous witch pricking test. The townsfolk watch eagerly, fully convinced that this is a scientifically valid method of identifying witches. Despite the fact that it is completely ridiculous, you already know how this will go, because medieval people do not understand how skin works. The pricking begins. The accused sits trembling, barely holding herself together, as the magistrate lifts the needle, preparing to perform what should be the simplest possible test. He pricks her arm. A small drop of blood appears. By any reasonable standard, this should mean she is innocent, because she bleeds like every other human being, meaning she is not a supernatural entity. But medieval logic does not operate on reason. Instead, a villager gasps dramatically, pointing at the wound. The blood is too slow. The townsfolk murmur in agreement, nodding as though they understand something you do not. She is resisting the test. She is holding her blood inside. She knows we are watching and is trying to fool us. The magistrate squints suspiciously, as though observing the most convincing evidence of witchcraft in history. Then pricks her again, this time on the hand. More blood appears. Yet somehow, this is also suspicious. The blood came too quickly. No normal woman bleeds like that. She must have changed her body with dark magic. You inhale so sharply. You nearly collapse from second-hand frustration. Because no matter what happens, this trial will not allow innocence to exist. And before you can process the sheer madness of the situation, the magistrate nods decisively, declaring, "She is guilty." The accused cries out, begs for mercy, but the crowd has already accepted the verdict, fully convinced that medieval science has proven her guilt beyond all doubt. Her punishment: a formal witch execution. Because medieval England does not believe in second chances when it comes to supernatural accusations. The magistrate turns to you, as though expecting you to simply accept what has happened, before checking his records for the next local problem. He sighs, flipping a parchment, then announces, "The town requires a messenger." And just like that, you have a new job. You are now a medieval messenger. And this job is going to be exhausting, dangerous, and entirely thankless. You are now a medieval messenger, and this job is going to be exhausting, dangerous, and entirely thankless. At first glance, it seems simple enough. Delivering messages between towns, carrying official letters from lords, merchants, and magistrates, ensuring that news travels across the land. But medieval travel is a disaster. There are no safe roads, no reliable routes, no protection from bandits, and absolutely no guarantee that you will even survive the journey. And today's assignment is already doomed from the start. The message you must deliver. The magistrate hands you a sealed letter, nodding as though this is a noble task, despite knowing exactly how much suffering is about to happen. "This must reach Lord Edmund by sundown," he says. You blink at him. Lord Edmund's estate is 3 towns away. The roads are muddy. The forests are filled with thieves. And the only transportation available is your own feet. Because horses are only reserved for knights and people who actually matter. You already know you are not making it by sundown. But medieval officials do not care for reality. So, with deep reluctance, you begin your journey, stepping onto the unmaintained dirt path, bracing yourself for absolute chaos. The roads are immediately unbearable. Within the first hour, the problems begin. The path is uneven, filled with deep puddles, hidden rocks, and far too many questionable smells, all strong indicators that something died here recently. You do not investigate, because knowing would make things worse. Instead, you focus on maintaining a reasonable pace, keeping your eyes forward, ensuring that the message remains safe. But medieval England does not allow peace, because ahead of you, you spot movement, a group of figures lurking near the path, watching you closely. You already know what this means: bandits. Because of course, you slow your steps, calculating your odds against the group ahead. Bandits in medieval England are not subtle, nor are they particularly concerned with fairness. They survive by robbing isolated travelers, and right now, you are exactly that. You glance at your supplies, which consist of nothing helpful, unless bandits can be defeated with a slightly damp letter and a sense of frustration. You consider running, but the roads do not favor escape. The mud is thick, the terrain uneven, and there is nowhere to hide. Just open fields, distant trees. An absolute doom waiting in the form of 4 armed men who have already decided that you are their next victim. One of them steps forward, grinning like someone who has never been punched, but absolutely deserves to be. You travel alone, he notes. You say nothing, because what response could possibly help you right now? Another bandit gestures toward your bag, unimpressed. Eyes their coin. You hesitate, weighing your options, because if you say yes, they will take it. And if you say no, they will search you anyway. The third bandit, more impatient than the rest, decides to skip the discussion entirely, grabbing for your bag. prepared to seize whatever they desire, whether it exists or not. You do not have time to react, because just then, another figure appears, not a traveler, not a guard, but someone who looks more dangerous than the bandits themselves. And suddenly, the balance shifts entirely. The new figure steps into view, cloaked in something dark and unfamiliar, moving with a confidence that immediately unsettles the bandits. He does not announce himself. He does not draw a weapon. He simply exists, standing just beyond the edge of the road, watching with a calculated interest that suggests he has seen this situation before and knows exactly how it will end. The bandits hesitate, exchanging uncertain glances, because in medieval England, unexpected interruptions do not usually favor small-time thieves. Then the stranger speaks. The toll for this road has already been paid. You blink confused, because this is news to you. But the bandits, they react immediately, stepping back, glancing toward the tree line, as though considering retreat before confrontation. And suddenly, your chances of survival have drastically improved. The bandits hesitate, eyeing the stranger with growing uncertainty. Because in medieval England, territory matters. And if this man is claiming authority over the road, that means he belongs to something bigger than a simple gang of thieves. One of the bandits, trying to save face, scoffs. This road belongs to no one. The stranger tilts his head, unbothered. But the toll, he repeats calmly, has already been paid. And this is the moment where everything changes. Because one bandit, clearly more paranoid than the rest, suddenly reconsiders everything, glancing toward the shadows, as though expecting reinforcements to arrive from nowhere. And medieval thieves do not like uncertainty. So, instead of fighting, instead of risking whatever might happen next, they do something unexpected. They retreat quietly, quickly, without explanation, leaving you standing alone, staring at the stranger who has just saved your life without lifting a finger. And now you must ask yourself one very important question. Who is he? And why did he help you? You stare at the stranger, unsure whether to be grateful or deeply concerned, because medieval England does not offer free favors. If someone helps you, they expect something in return, either money, loyalty, or silence, depending on who they are and what power they hold. The stranger studies you, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking. You carry a message, he notes. You nod slowly, gripping the sealed letter as though it might protect you, despite knowing it absolutely will not. The stranger tilts his head, considering something only he understands, before saying, "Deliver it quickly. Do not stop again." Then, without further explanation, he steps back into the shadows, vanishing entirely, as though he was never there at all. And suddenly, you are alone again. The road stretches ahead, uncertain and potentially worse than before, but now you must finish this journey before another complication arises. And in medieval England, complications always arise. The road ahead stretches endlessly, a winding, uncertain path carved through fields, forests, and ruins of forgotten battles. You walk with purpose, but not with certainty, because in medieval England, certainty is a luxury few can afford. Your encounter with the stranger lingers in your mind. The way the bandits retreated immediately. The way he claimed authority over the road without drawing a weapon. The way his presence alone shifted the balance of power. Was he an outlaw, a spy, a rival leader ensuring that lesser thieves did not disrupt his plans? You have no answers, and you cannot afford to dwell on them. Because Lord Edmund expects his message, and failure to deliver is not an option. The journey turns, worse hours pass. The sky darkens, shifting toward evening, and the dirt path narrows, winding toward thick woods that serve as the final stretch before reaching the estate. The forests are quiet, but not peaceful. They are too still, too watchful, filled with the unspoken presence of dangers you cannot yet see. You adjust your grip on the letter, as though holding it tighter might somehow change your fate, and step forward, bracing for whatever comes next. Then, the sound. A horse, moving slowly through the trees. Its hooves deliberate, measured, as though its rider does not wish to be noticed. You freeze. Because in medieval England, few travel alone at night unless they have a reason to avoid attention. The rider emerges, cloaked, face hidden by the shadow of his hood, moving with an unsettling ease. You are not sure if he has seen you yet, but you already know that if he has, this situation might shift drastically. And the letter might not reach Lord Edmund at all. The rider shifts slightly, adjusting his cloak as his horse continues its slow advance. The sound of hooves pressing against damp earth, unnaturally measured. You do not move, calculating your options, knowing that in medieval forests, silence is a currency and motion invites attention. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of wet leaves and something else. Something metallic, something sharp. Then, he speaks. A voice low, deliberate, carrying across the stillness like a knife slipping through cloth. You travel alone, and not a question, not a greeting. An observation, delivered with the ease of someone who already knows the answer. And now you must decide whether to respond. And if so, how carefully to craft your words. Because in medieval forests, encounters like this rarely end without consequence. The rider waits, letting the silence settle, as though giving you time to consider your next words carefully. You feel the weight of his gaze, though his face is still partially obscured by his hood. A deliberate choice that only deepens the uncertainty of this encounter. The road behind you is empty. The road ahead is blocked by his presence. There is no escape. You inhale slowly, calculating the odds of this conversation turning violent, realizing that the way he watches you is not just curiosity. It is assessment. Then, you speak. I carry a message. You say, careful not to reveal too much, because in medieval forests, even the simplest truth can be dangerous. The rider nods slightly, as though this answer was expected, but does not immediately respond. Instead, he tilts his head, studying the letter in your grip. Who is it for? You hesitate. Because now you must decide whether revealing Lord Edmund's name will increase your danger or lessen it. Does this man work for Edmund? Does he oppose him? Or does he simply want the letter for reasons you will never understand? You tighten your grip, feeling the parchment rough against your fingers, and carefully say, "It is not mine to discuss." The rider chuckles quietly, a sound that is neither friendly nor overtly threatening, but carries an undeniable air of amusement, as though he finds your caution irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Everything is someone's to discuss, he says. You feel the tension deepen, because now you know this conversation will not end quickly. The rider is testing you. Your patience, your fear, your willingness to hold on to whatever duty you've been given, despite the fact that medieval England is designed to make messengers fail. Are you an honest courier? He asks, voice smooth, calculated, with the tone of someone who deals in information for a living. You blink at him, unsure how to respond. Because what answer could possibly be right? What answer keeps you alive? The conversation takes a turn. You decide to play the safest option. You nod. I carry what I am given. I do not question it. The rider leans slightly forward, as though considering your words carefully. Then, he laughs softly, shaking his head. Then you are either very wise, he says, or very foolish. You feel a sharp sense of unease, because that response suggests he has already decided something about you, something you do not yet understand. He lifts a hand, signaling his horse to move slightly, positioning himself closer to the road, but not enough to block your path entirely. A deliberate power move, one that gives him control without being overtly aggressive. Do you fear being intercepted? He asks. You consider the weight of the question, because of course you do, but admitting it makes you a target. So, instead, you say, I only fear failing my delivery. The rider nods slowly, as though accepting this answer, but not necessarily believing it. Then, after a moment, he gestures toward the path ahead. Continue, he says simply. You pause, uncertain. That's it, you ask. He smiles faintly, though it carries no warmth. I have seen what I needed to see, and then just like that, the encounter is over. He turns his horse, disappearing into the shadows of the forest with unsettling ease, leaving you standing alone again, wondering if this conversation will matter in ways you cannot yet predict. But there is no time to dwell on it now, because Lord Edmund still awaits his letter, and your journey must continue, whether you like it or not. The forest fades behind you, its eerie presence lingering in your thoughts as you finally step onto the main road leading to Lord Edmund's estate. The terrain flattens, shifting from muddy uncertainty to firm ground, marked by stone pathways and carefully placed torches, a clear sign that you are no longer in lawless territory. But that does not mean safety is guaranteed. Lord Edmund is wealthy, influential, and deeply invested in the affairs of the kingdom. Whatever is written in this letter, it is not small news. You tighten your grip on the parchment, knowing that delivering it means stepping into a world where secrets hold more power than swords. And tonight, you are walking straight into it. The arrival at Lord Edmund's estate. The gate looms ahead, tall and reinforced with iron fittings, guarded by two men who look mildly unimpressed with your existence. You approach without hesitation, because in medieval England, messengers must always act with certainty, even when they have none. One guard raises an eyebrow, studying you before saying flatly, "You're expected." You blink, because how could you be expected? You haven't sent word ahead. The journey was uncertain, the timing unpredictable. And yet, Lord Edmund already knows you are coming, which means someone else does too. And now you must figure out whether that is a good thing, or a very, very bad thing. The guards escort you inside, leading you through stone corridors, lined with banners, past servants moving quickly to finish their nightly duties, until finally, you arrive at Lord Edmund's chamber. The air is thick with the scent of burning wax and ink, a clear sign that papers have been rewritten, and sealed within the past few hours. Lord Edmund sits at his desk, quill still in hand, eyes sharp and deeply calculating, the kind of gaze that measures everything, including your worth, before deciding if he will speak at all. "You have something for me," he says. Not a question, but a statement, because he already knows. You nod, stepping forward, presenting the sealed letter, careful not to reveal any hint of hesitation. Because in medieval courts, uncertainty is weakness. He takes it without looking at you, breaking the seal with practiced ease, scanning the words as if expecting them to be either deeply important or deeply disappointing. Then, he stops. His expression does not change, but his fingers tighten slightly around the parchment, a detail so small that most would miss it, but you do not. Because this is the moment when everything shifts. Whatever is written in that letter, it is not what he expected. And now you are involved in something far larger than a simple delivery mission. Lord Edmund finishes reading the letter. His expression calm but undeniably tense, as though what he has just learned is not what he expected, but something far worse. He sets the parchment down, tapping his fingers against the desk, his gaze now fixed entirely on you. "You were not stopped on your journey?" he asks, voice measured. You hesitate because the truth is not simple. Do you mention the bandits? Do you mention the stranger in the forest? Do you admit that this letter was dangerously close to never arriving at all? You choose your words carefully, because in medieval courts, every answer carries weight. "I delivered the letter without interference," you say, avoiding any unnecessary details. Lord Edmund nods slowly, but he is not convinced, not fully. "Then tell me," he says, voice steady, "why you arrived later than expected." And suddenly, you realize you cannot lie, because somehow Lord Edmund already knows something happened. And now you must decide how much you are willing to reveal, and how deeply you are willing to step into a world of secrets far beyond your control. You weigh your options, knowing that Lord Edmund expects the truth, but not necessarily all of it. If you tell him everything, you risk entangling yourself in matters far beyond a simple delivery. If you tell him nothing, you risk losing his trust entirely. So, you balance. You measure your words carefully, saying, "I encountered delays on the road, unfamiliar faces, a few interruptions," but the letter remained intact. Lord Edmund leans back slightly, eyes narrowing. "Unfamiliar faces." You nod. "Thieves." You say. Then, after a pause, add just enough detail to keep yourself honest. "And someone else. A rider dressed plainly, but with the presence of someone who is used to controlling a situation." Edmund's expression tightens, though he does not immediately react. Instead, he turns the letter over in his hands, his fingers briefly tracing the seal, as though confirming something beyond its contents. Then, he sets it down, looking at you with sharp calculation. "You delivered this safely," he says. You nod. "Then tell me, would you do it again?" And just like that, your role has changed. Because now this is not just about a single letter. This is about what happens next, and whether you wish to be part of it at all. You consider your answer carefully, knowing that whatever you say next will determine your future. Because delivering messages, that was just a task. But this is something else entirely, an invitation into a world where words hold power, where secrets shape kingdoms, and where a single decision might determine whether you thrive or disappear. Lord Edmund waits, watching you closely, expecting an answer that carries meaning, not hesitation. If you say yes, you commit to something beyond simple deliveries. If you say no, you risk losing favor, losing opportunity, losing knowledge that might one day be crucial. The air hangs heavy, as though the very walls of the chamber understand that this moment matters. And then, you speak, your voice steady, measured, carrying the weight of a choice that will not be undone. "I will deliver more." Lord Edmund nods slightly, satisfied. "Good," he says. And just like that, you are no longer just a messenger. You are something more now. A courier of secrets, a voice between powerful men. A pawn in a game that you do not yet understand. But one thing is certain. This is only the beginning. Lord Edmund studies you, as though measuring exactly how much trust he should place in you. "You will need discretion," he says. You nod, because that much is obvious. Whatever messages you carry from now on will be more than simple letters. They will hold weight, and sometimes they will hold danger. Lord Edmund lifts a second parchment, freshly sealed, pressing his thumb firmly against the wax, ensuring that it remains unbroken until it reaches its destination. "You will deliver this?" he says. You step forward, accepting the letter, careful not to ask too many questions, because couriers who know too much often disappear without answers. "Who is receiving it?" you ask. Lord Edmund's expression darkens slightly, but he answers simply, "A man who prefers not to be named. You will meet him at the old mill outside the southern border at dusk." Or your pulse quickens slightly, because secrecy like this never ends simply. But you have already accepted this role, and now you must carry it through. Lord Edmund waves a hand, signaling that the conversation is over. You bow slightly, turn, and step toward the next chapter of your journey. Because from here, everything becomes more than just deliveries. Everything becomes a game you must play carefully, or risk losing altogether. The journey to the old mill begins at sunset, when the roads are emptier, the shadows longer, and the air thick with uncertainty. This is not a normal delivery. This is a message for a man who prefers not to be named, which means he has reasons for secrecy, which means you must tread carefully. You adjust the weight of the sealed parchment, feeling the wax pressed firm, as though Lord Edmund himself wished to ensure it would remain untouched until it reached its final destination. And as you walk, stepping further from civilization, further into quiet roads, further toward unknown territory, you realize this will not end simply. The mill appears ahead. The structure rises from the landscape, its wooden beams weathered, its thatched roof worn. The grinding stone long silent, as though time itself has chosen to forget this place exists. You stand at the edge of the clearing, scanning for movement, for signs of arrival, for anything that suggests you are not alone. Then, a flicker. A single lantern. Its glow brief but deliberate, appearing in the darkness near the entrance, then vanishing as if acknowledging your arrival without revealing too much. A signal, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Regardless, you must continue forward, because the message must be delivered. And whoever waits inside knows you are here. You step forward, the weight of the letter heavy in your grip, each movement deliberate, each breath measured. Because in situations like this, confidence is a shield, and hesitation is an invitation for danger. The mill is silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves, the faint creak of old beams shifting under unseen pressure, as though the very walls understand what's about to happen. Then, a voice, smooth, calm, unbothered by the secrecy of this meeting. You are punctual. A figure emerges from the shadows, his cloak plain but perfectly tailored, his stance relaxed, but undeniably aware of every detail in the room. He is not a common man. He is someone who does not need introductions, but expects them anyway. You inhale slowly, measuring your next words, because whatever happens next will determine what kind of messenger you truly are. The exchange begins. The figure steps closer, moving with the ease of someone completely unbothered by the secrecy surrounding this meeting. He does not rush. He does not hesitate. He merely exists in this space with complete control, as though the very air adjusts itself to accommodate his presence. "You have it?" he asks, not impatiently, not doubtfully, but as if confirmation is merely a formality. You nod, presenting the sealed letter, careful not to grip it too tightly, because in situations like this, power is in perception, and a messenger who appears tense is a messenger who becomes a liability. He takes the letter with measured grace, holding it for a single, waited moment before, with precision, breaking the seal. The wax splits cleanly, curling against the edges of the parchment, revealing the words that have been carried in secrecy across roads, that threatened to betray them at every turn. He reads, his expression carefully neutral, his breath steady, his gaze flickering across every line, as though dissecting not just the contents, but the implications behind them. You wait. Because this is the moment when a messenger learns more than they should. A shift in the air. The silence does not break immediately. It lingers, wrapping around the room like the scent of old paper and burning wax, turning the space into something heavier than mere shadows. Then, a flicker of movement, a slight, almost imperceptible tightening of his jawline, the briefest clench of fingers against parchment, a reaction so small that most would miss it, but you do not. Whatever is written in this letter, it is not what he expected. He sets the parchment down, his posture shifting just slightly, enough to suggest that what was once a mere exchange has now become something more calculated. You encountered no difficulties? He asks, eyes finally lifting to meet yours fully, searching for something beyond just an answer. Perhaps a confirmation, perhaps an inconsistency. You inhale slowly, calculating your words carefully, knowing that this conversation is now more than just a delivery. It is an assessment, and you are the subject of it. None that affected the letter. You reply measured, deliberate. A pause. Then, another subtle shift. The smallest tilting of his head, as though mentally threading together possibilities that did not exist before this exchange began. You are not Lord Edmund's usual courier, he says, not accusingly, but as though this detail has just now become important. You do not react outwardly, but inwardly you note the significance of his observation. Not his usual courier, which means he knew the previous one. Which means this exchange is not just about a letter. It is about a pattern that has been disrupted, and you are now part of that disruption. The weight of unseen threads. Do you know what you carry? He asks, not demanding, not expecting an answer, but testing. You consider your response carefully, because in medieval courts, words are more dangerous than blades, and honesty is rarely a safe path. So, instead, you reply precisely, I carry messages. I do not interpret them. A moment of quiet. Then, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze, something that is not quite doubt, not quite belief, but something just in between. You may leave, he finally says. The words are simple, but nothing about them is casual. Because, in every step you take from this mill, in every breath that follows, you are now watched in ways you were not before. The letter has been delivered, but this is not over. Not by a long stretch. And now, you must decide whether you are truly just a messenger, or something more than that. The journey back to town, you leave the mill behind, stepping onto the road with a strange weight in your chest, because whatever just happened, it was not a simple exchange. The words spoken, the reactions measured, the tension so carefully controlled, it was all more than just a message passed from one hand to another. You were being observed, being tested, being weighed against expectations you did not even know existed. And now you are involved, whether you wanted to be or not. The road feels different now. The way back should be easier. The forest has not changed. The paths are still winding. The air still thick with uncertainty. But you have changed. Because now, every shadow feels heavier. Every distant rustling in the leaves makes you wonder if someone is watching. If someone is following. If the rider you encountered before was part of something far larger than you realized. But you do not stop. Because messengers do not hesitate. Not when they know hesitation gets them killed. The return to town. By the time you step through the town gates, the streets are quieter. The night air carrying the scent of bread, cooling in forgotten ovens, and the distant hum of people settling in for whatever miserable dreams plague their sleep. You should feel relief. You should feel some sense of accomplishment, having delivered a letter that clearly meant something to men far more powerful than yourself. But instead, you feel only exhaustion. Because this isn't over, Lord Edmund will have more letters, and the man at the mill will have more questions. And you will keep walking roads that were never meant for men like you to survive. But before you can even process your future, a new problem presents itself. Because another messenger arrives, eyes frantic, breath short, looking like a man who would rather be anywhere else but here. And his words are exactly what you expected. The magistrate requires you, he says. You close your eyes briefly, summoning the last pieces of your sanity, before finally asking, for what? The man shakes his head, looking at you with deep pity, before replying. The town needs a rat catcher. The infestation has returned. You inhale slowly, nodding, because of course. Back to the rats, back to the suffering, back to chasing creatures who have lived better lives than you ever will. And just like that, your life spirals into misery once again, because in medieval England, no job ever truly ends. The next miserable job. Medieval bathhouse. Attendant, you drag yourself to the magistrate's office, expecting nothing but suffering, hoping against all odds that perhaps, just this once, fate might spare you from another nightmarish assignment. You are wrong. Because the magistrate, without hesitation, without sympathy, without the slightest flicker of regret, announces, you will report to the town bathhouse. They require an attendant. You inhale sharply, summoning every remaining shred of patience, before finally asking, what does an attendant do? The magistrate scoffs, waving a dismissive hand, as though the question itself is unimportant, before replying, you will maintain order, ensure proper hygiene, and keep the water clean. You blink. Keep the water clean? In a medieval bathhouse. The words should not even be in the same sentence, because medieval bathing is a disaster waiting to happen. The horror of medieval bathhouses, the town bathhouse is not elegant, not sanitary, and certainly not a place for relaxation. It is a cesspool of questionable decisions, a place where townsfolk gather to dunk themselves into lukewarm water and pretend they are washing away their filth, despite absolutely no understanding of proper hygiene. The structure is dimly lit, the air thick with steam. The floor constantly slick with mysterious liquids that you absolutely do not want to identify. Buckets of heated water are dumped into a communal tub, meaning everyone shares the same bacteria-infested bath, hoping that somehow soaking in it will improve their health rather than actively destroy it. And you are expected to manage this disaster, ensuring that people do not drown, do not fight, and, against all odds, do not make the situation worse than it already is, which is impossible, because medieval people do not understand cleanliness. Your first shift begins. The bathhouse master introduces you to your duties, with all the enthusiasm of a man who has given up on life entirely. You make sure they pay, he says, nodding toward a collection box that is far too small for the number of people arriving. You glance toward the incoming bathers, realizing instantly that most of them look highly uninterested in payment, as though the concept of giving coin for hygiene personally offends them. Then, the bathhouse master continues. You keep the water clean. You stare at him, attempting to understand how such a task is even possible, before reluctantly asking, and how do I do that? He shrugs, as though the answer is irrelevant, then says, if someone dies in the tub, pull them out before the next person gets in. You inhale so sharply, your soul nearly leaves your body. Because this job is going to be worse than expected. And it was already a nightmare from the start. The chaos begins immediately within minutes. The bathhouse is filled. Villagers arguing over space, shoving each other, and questioning why water is necessary at all, as though being rinsed is a personal attack against their existence. A man slips, crashes directly into another bather, resulting in a shouted accusation of attempted murder, despite the fact that no one has drowned. Yet, a woman demands better soap, despite the fact that the bathhouse does not have soap, only suspicious clumps of herbs that may or may not be expired. And at the far end of the tub, someone is drinking the bathwater. You close your eyes briefly, summoning what little remains of your sanity, before sighing deeply, because somehow you must survive this shift, and somehow you must prevent these people from destroying what little dignity is left in this building. Which is impossible, because medieval bathhouses are beyond saving. The bathhouse descends into chaos. You brace yourself, fully aware that keeping order in a medieval bathhouse is an impossible task. But you have no choice. This is your miserable job, and whether you like it or not, you must survive the night. The air is thick with steam, mixing with the overpowering scent of sweat, damp wool, and questionable herbs that someone insists are for cleansing the spirit, despite the fact that no one's spirit is being cleansed here. A man loudly complains that the water is too hot, while another insists that it is not hot enough, both arguing aggressively despite standing in the exact same tub. Nearby, a group of questionable individuals discuss the benefits of bathing once a year instead of once a month, citing absolutely no medical knowledge, but presenting their argument with deep conviction. And at the far end of the bathhouse, a man is trying to sell an eel. You do not ask questions. You do not engage. Because the only thing worse than working in a medieval bathhouse is interacting with the people who voluntarily spend time here. Your first disaster of the night, it happens exactly as expected. Suddenly, dramatically, and with absolutely no reason to exist. A fight breaks out. The cause? Soap theft. Despite the fact that there is no actual soap in the bathhouse, only clumps of dried herbs, someone has decided that their cleaning materials have been stolen. And now, a brawl has erupted in the communal tub. Two men grapple fiercely, splashing water everywhere, as spectators cheer them on, treating this moment as entertainment rather than a deep societal failure. You sigh heavily, knowing that you must intervene. Because if the magistrate hears that someone drowned over a non-existent bar of soap, your miserable job will become even worse. You step forward, raising your voice, attempting to restore order. "Enough!" you shout, hoping that authority will matter here. It does not, because in medieval England, no one listens to bathhouse attendants. Intervention is useless. The fight escalates, shifting from petty argument to full-blown disaster, as someone loses their footing, crashes into a stack of buckets, sending questionable bathwater spilling across the floor, creating a slippery, hazardous mess that absolutely should not exist. People scatter, shouting accusations, blaming the bathhouse itself for their misfortune, despite the fact that this is entirely their fault. A woman insists that this incident is a bad omen, claiming that the spirits of the bathhouse are angry, because apparently, even the supernatural realm wants nothing to do with this place. And at the far end of the bathhouse, the eel salesman is still trying to make a sale, completely unbothered by the catastrophe unfolding around him. You inhale deeply, accepting your fate. Because the only thing worse than working in a medieval bathhouse is realizing that you will have to do this again. Tomorrow. The magistrate finds you a new job. Morning comes. You drag yourself back to the magistrate, ready to beg for relief, knowing that surely there must be something less awful than bathhouse work. The magistrate looks at you briefly, unimpressed by your suffering, before waving a hand dismissively. You will report to the town square, he says. You blink, suspicious. For what? The stocks need managing, he replies. And just like that, you are now the town stock keeper, where your new miserable task is ensuring that those punished remain publicly humiliated and somehow do not escape. The new miserable job, town stock keeper, you report to the town square, expecting nothing but suffering, knowing that whatever this new assignment is, it will absolutely make your life worse. The magistrate does not bother with explanations. The stocks need managing, he says, waving dismissively, as though your existence is purely a formality in the grand scheme of medieval punishment. You blink slowly, preparing yourself for yet another disaster, before reluctantly asking, "What exactly do I do?" The magistrate scoffs, unimpressed by your need for details. You ensure the prisoners remain locked in place. You manage the crowds. And, he gestures vaguely, you deal with whatever nonsense occurs. Whatever nonsense occurs. That is not a comforting job description. That is a warning. And before you can process your misery, you arrive at your new workplace. The center of town, where the punishment stocks stand waiting, ready to ruin your day immediately. The stocks are a disaster. The stocks are not elegant, not fair, and certainly not effective at rehabilitation. They are a public spectacle, designed purely for humiliation, where criminals are locked in place, forced to endure the endless taunts and laughter of passing villagers, because medieval punishment was less about actual justice and more about public entertainment. At this moment, 3 unfortunate souls are trapped within them. A thief, accused of stealing a wheel of cheese, though he insists he was simply borrowing it indefinitely. A drunkard, punished for causing a scene at the tavern, despite the fact that everyone causes a scene at the tavern nightly. An old woman, accused of selling cursed turnips, though she claims she is simply ahead of her time in agricultural marketing strategies. Your job: to ensure they remain in place, to keep the crowd from escalating into full-blown chaos, and somehow to not lose your sanity in the process. Which is impossible, because medieval public punishment always spirals into nonsense. The humiliation begins within minutes. Spectators gather, eager to mock and torment those unfortunate enough to be locked in place. A group of children throw rotten vegetables. Their aim shockingly accurate, their laughter deeply unsettling, as though they were training for future careers in cruelty. A man argues loudly, demanding that the thief be punished more severely, insisting that cheese theft is an offense against the very soul of civilization itself. The drunkard sings aggressively, refusing to acknowledge that he is meant to feel shame, instead turning this experience into his own personal performance, much to the frustration of the magistrate. And the old woman, she does not complain. She does not beg for mercy. She simply uses this moment to aggressively promote her turnips, insisting that if they were truly cursed, she would not be alive right now, which, surprisingly, convinces several people to buy them anyway. You close your eyes briefly, summoning every last shred of patience, because somehow, someway, you must survive this shift, and somehow, against all odds, you must ensure that these prisoners remain in place, despite the fact that medieval punishment is never stable, never fair, and always ridiculous. The next disaster approaches as the sun rises higher, The crowd grows bolder, spectators encouraging more nonsense, eager to push boundaries that absolutely should not be pushed. Then, the inevitable happens. Someone tries to free a prisoner. A man, dressed in rags, but clearly motivated by foolish heroism, rushes toward the stocks, determined to break them open, shouting about liberation and the tyranny of cheese-based accusations. You sigh deeply, knowing that this will only make your day worse. Because now you must stop this ridiculous attempt at rebellion, without making the situation even more humiliating than it already is. Which is impossible, because medieval justice was never designed for dignity. The town square falls into chaos. The would-be hero charges toward the stocks, arms flailing dramatically, shouting about justice, tyranny, and how the thief's right to cheese must be defended at all costs. You brace yourself, knowing that if this attempt succeeds, your already miserable day will spiral into something much worse. The crowd erupts, some cheering, some laughing, others shouting wildly about whether a stolen wheel of cheese is worth this level of rebellion. The thief, despite being the center of this dramatic rescue attempt, sighs deeply, muttering, "I didn't even get to eat the cheese." The magistrate arrives, eyes filled with pure exhaustion, realizing that once again, his town has failed to behave like reasonable people. He takes one long look at you, at the struggling prisoners, at the man attempting a deeply uncoordinated rescue, and says, without emotion, "Enough." And medieval crowds respect a magistrate's exhaustion, because immediately, everyone stops. The thief stays in the stocks. The drunkard continues singing. The old woman resumes advertising her cursed turnips, and the hero, he realizes this was a mistake and wanders off quietly, hoping everyone forgets he ever tried this at all. You exhale deeply, accepting that this is your life now. This is your never-ending cycle of medieval nonsense. This is the fate of those cursed with miserable jobs. And tomorrow, it will happen all over again. Because in medieval England, everything is suffering. But lucky for you, you don't have to deal with this nonsense right now. Because it is time to sleep. And unlike our unfortunate stock-bound thief, you can actually lie down without a rotten cabbage being thrown at your face. So rest up, dream of jobs that don't involve cursed turnips, and sleep well. Because tomorrow, we might dive into a new medieval disaster you never knew you needed. Now, go forth and sleep like a well-fed lord, instead of a medieval stock keeper.